In the 1840s, trapper Nathan Hersey was traveling up the Muskegon River when he came across a stream branching off to the west. Soon after, pioneer lumber baron Delos Blodgett decided to settle and farm the land nearby the confluence of these two rivers. A few hundred feet from this very spot lies the village limit of the small town he named in honor of the old trapper. In 1869, Hersey became the first village in the Richmond Township of Osceola County, Michigan. Hersey was predominantly settled by German immigrants seeking religious freedom and land ownership. Along with their dreams, these early settlers brought with them their faith in both an evangelical religion and a strong family orientation. Among those fleeing Europe was 17-year-old Jacob Heist, who arrived in a foreign land with $1 and the clothes on his back. Jacob Heist's daughter Lena married Herbert Heist, son of Wilhelm Heist and Amanda Bolzer, ironically linking two unrelated Heist families. Herbert and Lena Heist's eldest son, Arthur Herbert, married Maxine Locher, daughter of Roland and Eva Locher, members of another prominent farming family in the Osceola County area. Arthur and Maxine Heist have raised a family with strong ties to one another as well as to Hersey. Together we will travel back to the village of Hersey and some of its many intriguing stories.
We're standing at the northwest corner of Grandpa's farm. Now Grandpa means that it was my mother's father, and they continued till my mother grew up here. The barn is still standing that they had. The house is gone. They tore the house down when they built the house in Hersey. Much of the material from the old house was taken to build the house in Hersey. Now this is just a mile west rather, of where I grew up, and my mother married my father, who lived at about a mile east of here, and then she spent the rest of her life within a mile of where she was born. Actually, most of her life until she moved to town, but her life on the farm was entirely from the year she was born until she moved to Hersey. For all those years, she moved to Hersey when she was probably 60-some years old, and she lived within a mile of where she was born. This farm was farmed then by my family until my father died. When my father died, it was sold to Aunt Liddy's family, which is my mother's sister, and the Singlobs, and they continue to own it. They still have it in the family. So the farm has been in the family for over 100 years. We're at the foundation of the house where I was born. Actually, the house, we continued to live there until I went to college. And my mother and family lived there a few years after that, but the house was burned. Probably it was burned after I moved to Lansing. The house was burned at that point in time. And the building behind it was the old ice house, used to be the ice house, and they converted it into a kind of a shop. And then after the house burned, they actually lived in there about a year or two before they bought the Teasdale farm, where they moved to after that. Behind the woodpile was the dairy barn. It was a bank barn, and the incline you see in front was actually the bank that went into the thrash floor of the dairy barn. And then to the right of that, the building that's still standing, we called it the driving shed, but it really was a tool storage. It was really served as a tool storage, and underneath, you see the stone wall underneath, that was our pig pen, and we raised hogs, and the hogs were raised on that, and we had a little area for them to run. To the south of that, to the right of this, was our garden, and the first part. Then the back part was a little bit of a calf lot where we used to run calves. My grandmother, who was my father's mother, Amanda Bolzer Heist, was born in this house, and this house remained in the Bolzer family for over 100 years after that time. As a matter of fact, my great-grandmother, who was Marguerite Arndt Balzer, lived here. She and her husband lived here. They established a home here and got the land from the government back in the mid-1800s, and it's been in the family ever since, up until maybe like 10 or 15 years ago. This is where my mother's younger brother was buried. He got his foot caught, or arm leg caught, in a buggy wheel when they were getting ready to go to church. Grandpa just hung up the buggy and they were going to go to church, and he got his foot caught and twisted his leg, and he died. Apparently blood poisoning set in after the accident, and of course they didn't have penicillin and all those kinds of drugs at that point in time, and he just never lived. He just died some few months afterwards. I think the inscription says Irwin E. Heiss died October 18, 1908 at age 9 years, 4 months, and 9 days. Okay? This is the Bittner Cemetery, incidentally. And so it's a little old private cemetery that's been kind of low. It's been kind of maintained by some relatives of descendants of the Bittners who live right close to here and have a rather large farm operation pretty close to this cemetery. We're east of Hersey. We're about halfway between Hersey and Reed City.
Coming down the lane heading back to the Heiss property of just over 60 acres, the serene landscape is abruptly interrupted with metal objects on a dusty plot. This natural gas well, which at one time earned around $4,000 a month, appears to be petering out, with recent monthly averages of only $30.
We're now at the creek on the 60, about a third of the way back to the woods. We're just south of where the gas well is located, and there's a stream here that has a spring back in this hill, probably 600 feet from where we are. The spring originates and has a nice flow of water. And I've always suggested that we might be able to build a dam about where we're located, and would create a pond back here, a trout pond, freshwater trout pond, for about 3 or 4 acres in size. This back to the south of us now, to the right of where I'm standing, there's a pretty good woods. It's pretty rough ground, and never could be farmed. It's too rough to farm, but it grows good maple trees. We had a timber cutting in here about 3 years ago, and I think we can have a reasonable timber cutting of mostly maple every 10 or 12 years. That pile of rock behind there is an indicative of the rock that the glacier brought to this area. Those rocks were all picked out of the field where we wanted to farm. They were picked out by hand and dumped in there off the wagon, and in front of the rocks along the stream. If you put your camera just a little bit lower, you see some big rocks.
Some of these larger rocks were simply discarded into piles so that horses and farm equipment could be used to farm. Nevertheless, many rocks were used to build fences, such as this stone fence on the 60. These fences are common in the region, scattered throughout farms and barnyards, even separating trees from roads, such as these rocks running along Paul Heiss property.